Okay, here's the book. We're doing quotes from the Holy Grail of Wisdom quotes. We're doing Julius Caesar. He lived from 100 BC to 44 BC. And I really wish I could show you the paintings. I've got all the paintings in Best Christian Art organized. I wrote both these books about the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, and then I go through the life of Christ. I go through Old Testament, then through the life of Christ. The birth of Christ, the childhood of Christ, the ministry of Christ. Anyways, someday I wish I had the time. I would like to, write big historical books and simultaneously have everything combined. But you need a lot of time. You need a lot to do all that. But I would love to do that. It's actually kind of what I would like to do, is kind of be like a modern Aristotle, is put all this stuff together. Because no one else is really doing it. There's the books that are out there. There's some really good stuff, obviously. But it takes a while to find it. Anyways, let's go through Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was the greatest general in a nation of generals. Okay, he was very much of a badass. I actually think all young men should watch Julius Caesar, because the modern culture is so pussified, it's so wimpified, it's so disgusting and feminized. You don't even understand a guy like Julius Caesar. Okay, and don't get me wrong, he's a bit of a crazy guy, but just the intensity of him, he was more of a badass than Rambo. So Julius Caesar, born into the Julii family, traced its ancestry to Aeneas. So that's another thing we don't do. We don't pay attention that much to our ancestors. It's good for you to do that. It gives children pride. It gives them hope. It builds, resilience in them. I used to love the story about my grandfather in Puerto Rico being the smartest man in Puerto Rico. That made me feel proud. Okay. Anyways, those things are good. I was proud that my grandfather in Ireland was a national champion in bicycle riding. My dad was a national champion boxer, okay? That gave me pride, okay? And it's good for kids to have that. So anyways, this is a common thing you'll see in these ancient cultures. They trace their ancestry back to Aeneas. He was really the founder, one of sort of the co-founders of Rome in a sense, and he had, escaped from burning Troy. Okay, so Caesar was born by a cesarean section, and they named the procedure after him. Caesar's aunt was married to the great Gaius Marius, great military commander, and he learned a lot from him and admired him too as a role model. Caesar was very ambitious. He was a great soldier. He fought and distinguished himself. And when he was 33 years old, he was still sort of rising in the ranks. And he saw a statue of Alexander the Great. And at 33 years of age, when he saw that, Caesar started crying, and he's like, at 33 years of age, Alexander the Great had conquered the whole world, and I haven't done anything yet. And he vowed that the rest of his life, he would devote himself to becoming one of the great all-time conquerors of all time. And he did. He was traveling through a village, and it was sort of like a peasant, illiterate village. And some of the men mocked the village, and Caesar said, I would rather be the number one man in this barbarian village than the number two man in Rome. That's how intense he was. And he said things like, with training, the men had knowledge. With knowledge, they had confidence. With confidence, they had victory. But he was also smart, and this is very much of a Roman thing to say. He who conquers twice shows the mercy. He conquers twice who shows mercy to the conquered. That's sort of the Roman ethic. They saw themselves as superior beings. And when they conquered these lowlifes, they would show mercy to them quite often, not always, but quite often, depending on the situation, as a sign of what high humans they were. So there's other pictures of that. Like if you look at some of the other Roman generals, you'll see that, like Africanus, Scipio Africanus, and whatnot. Okay, and just some stories about Caesar, Julius Caesar. He was, on a boat with, military work, and he was captured by pirates, and he was taken prisoner by pirates to be enslaved and sold for ransom. And they were figuring out what the ransom would be for Caesar, and Caesar said, I am a great man. My ransom should be higher. And the pirates kind of mocked him. He said, go ahead, mock me. You'll see what happens. Once I am set free, I will come back and kill all of you. So anyways, the pirates got a really high ransom, a lot of money for Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, as soon as he was free, he borrowed a bunch of money, and he got a bunch of military men together, and they got a bunch of boats, and they went around chasing the pirates. And when Julius Caesar captured the pirates that had previously imprisoned him, he killed all of them, and he took them, the ones he hadn't killed already, he took them and he crucified all of them. So that's what it is like. You mofo, I will crucify you. I'm trying to. The reason why I think young guys should see this is understand the intensity of these guys. You want to see that, okay? Because it helps you to recognize how wimpified modern culture is. Now, don't get me wrong. I like the ancient Greeks 1,000 times more than I like the ancient Romans. The ancient Greeks were brilliant. They're the most interesting culture that ever existed on the planet. Just about. I mean, of the primitive cultures, there's nothing even close to them in comparison. The ancient Greeks are by far the most interesting thing happening, I would say, before, before about 1400 AD. All right? They're awesome, the ancient Greeks. But the ancient Romans, you almost like learn all these good things from the ancient Greeks and you learn all these bad things from the ancient Romans. The ancient Romans were brutal. The ancient Romans will teach you a lot about power. The best of them was Cicero, and he's the most articulate and the most interesting. But there's still something to be learned from Julius Caesar and from Augustus Octavian Caesar, from Marcus Aurelius, etc., and a few other ones. Okay, so I just wanted to make that story clear. And there was also like the revolt of the slaves, the Spartacus revolt, and one of the other powerful men. He was in the triumvirate, Crassus. He was the richest man in ancient Rome. Crassus went and put down the slave revolt, and then he took all the revolting slaves and he crucified them, and he crucified them along the Appian Way, the biggest main highway in ancient Rome. And like every 500 yards, there'd be a crucified slave that had rebelled against ancient Rome. And again, that's the mentality of ancient Rome. These are like typical stories in ancient Rome. They would all be proud of these stories. There's other great stories, we don't have time to go through all of them, but that's the mentality of ancient Rome. Okay, they were tough guys. They were proud of their republic. That was the greatest thing, the republic. All right, let's see. Caesar also then felt that he had not conquered enough, that he had not made a great enough achievement. So even though he was already a consul, like one of the top 3 men in all of Rome, he wanted more achievement, so he decided to go conquer Gaul. Gaul is what we would call modern France, and the Gauls were Celts. But they have the fatal flaw of a lot of primitive cultures is that the chieftains were sort of fighting with each other to be who would be the boss. And, Caesar said all of Gaul is divided into 3 parts. There's the Celts, there's then the 2 other groups. And the reason I mention that is even though Caesar didn't have that many men, Julius Caesar, he had 24,000 men, and the Gauls had much more men than him, he was able to get them sort of divided against each other, fighting against each other, and he'd ally with one of them, get them to fight the other one, and he was able to break them down. And he basically massacred the Gauls. He probably killed like 1 million of them, okay? They were totally afraid of him. He's almost a bit of a genocidal maniac. But everywhere he went, Cicero generated military victories. He went into Spain, victories in Spain. He goes into Egypt, military victories in Egypt. He goes into Gaul, conquers the whole damn place. He goes into Britain, he conquers areas of Britain. He goes into Germany, okay? Caesar, broke into new territories. He was a bit of a maniac, but he was also an incredible, great genius. He often won major victories despite being massively outnumbered, okay? What happened was after he had gone, and oh, by the way, to let people know what was going on with him when he was in Gaul, he wrote the commentaries. And people who know Latin say it's some of the most brilliant writing in Latin that you will ever see. The guy was a genius, okay? He was brutal, but man, was he brave and fierce. He would be fighting himself in these battles, okay? Not all of them, but some of them. Okay. Then what ended up happening was Pompey, so he's in the triumvirate with Crassus, the richest man in all of Rome, and with Pompey, another great general. But then he went and conquered Gaul, but he was so successful in Gaul and became so popular. He was also making money, taxing the people, and then he'd pay off his debts to Crassus. But he became so popular that Pompey began to fear him, and then Pompey called him back and told him to come without his legions. And, Julius Caesar is a smart guy. He knew that if he came without his legions, Pompey would kill him. They'd make up some BS accusation and they would kill him. So he came back, and when he was coming back, he had to cross the river called the Rubicon. And he knows that once he crosses the Rubicon with his legions, that's it. Civil war in ancient Rome. And so when he crossed the Rubicon, he said, the die is cast. And what it basically meant, his fate is sealed. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. The die is cast. Cato the Younger refused to partner with Caesar. And when you look back on ancient Rome, who are considered, the great noble moral men of ancient Rome, it would be Cato the Younger, and it would also be Cicero. Cicero is my favorite Roman. If you only study one Roman, you want to study Cicero. Cicero's in the middle of everything. And Cicero's an awesome guy to study. Okay, if you want to read one book about ancient Rome, read Imperium about Cicero. Don't get me wrong, if you want to read a historical book that includes ancient Rome, I think The Light in the Cave, carrying the history from Plato and Aristotle is the best one by Arthur Herman. Okay, so, and also if you want to read the history of ancient Romans, the best one is the Great Romans by Rufus Fears. It's like a DVD course. It might be free on the internet, but that's the best. Okay, Rufus Fears is the greatest teacher ever out of all the teachers at thegreatcourses.com. Also Wondrium, same thing. Okay, let's see. Caesar rebuilt Corinth, and it later became important for St. Paul, like his letters to Corinthians. He rebuilt Carthage, later important for St. Augustine in his book, The City of God. In 44 BC, Caesar was made dictator perpetuatus, dictator for life. But he had messed up in a sense because he had moved too fast, and that generated a lot of jealousy. Cassius, of course, was the most jealous of him, but no word was more hated by the Romans of the Republic than the word king. And this is from Rufus Fears. And that's how Cassius was able to drum up support to bump off Julius Caesar. Okay. And then the sad thing, too, was Brutus, who was almost like an adopted son to him, turned on him, too. That's why when he was killed, they say, A2 Brutus. And there's lots of great paintings of all this stuff. I just can't combine it into this talk. I wouldn't be able to get it done in time. Okay. And then from, Julius Caesar, the play was written by William Shakespeare, and it's a great play. And one of the best scenes in it is the speech by Mark Antony. So Mark Antony was friends with Julius Caesar. Mark Antony was one of his highest ranking officers when Julius Caesar fought through Gaul and other military campaigns. Okay, so they were buddies and they were allies. And then after Cassius had killed Julius Caesar, Cassius had wanted to kill Mark Antony too, but Brutus talked him out of it. So Mark Antony was fighting for his own survival here too when he gave the speech. And what he really wanted to do was turn the peasants, the plebeians, the poor people, the proles of that time, against Cassius, and he succeeded. And so here's some of the speech from Mark Antony in the play by William Shakespeare. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you that Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault. And grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man. So are they all honorable men. Come I to speak in Caesar's funeral? He was my friend and faithful and just to me, but Brutus says he was ambitious. And Brutus is an honorable man. And then he kind of goes ahead and he says, you all did love him once and not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn him? My heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it come back to me. So what Mark Antony had done here is he's stirring up emotions. They got the dead body of Caesar, and he's stirring up the plebeians to go and kill Cassius and Brutus, and that's what happened. So it's a great speech. Julius Caesar put a big surprise in his will when he named his nephew Octavian to be the adopted son and heir. Octavian took the name and became Julius Caesar Octavianus, and other emperors would sometimes include Caesar in their name. Later, other words like the Caesar, the Tsar kind of comes from Caesar. The Kaiser comes from the word Caesar. Vini vidi vici is what he said after he quickly conquered this Egyptian general and his army. I came, I saw, I conquered is what that means in Latin. Other Julius Caesar quote, experience is the teacher of all things. Another quote by him is, men are quick to believe what they wish to be true. Okay, A2 Brute means, and you also, Brutus, have turned against me. And like I said, Cassius, especially Cassius, was a big hypocrite. He just wanted power for himself. Brutus was a little bit more noble. I think he thought what he was doing was what was best for Rome. But Cassius had turned him against Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar for July, Augustus Caesar for August are the only Romans that have a month named after them. And if you read Dante's Divine Comedy, what he considered the greatest sin of all time was like Brutus and Cassius having bumped off Julius Caesar, that they totally damaged the future of Rome by doing it. And I can also say, even though he was a bit of a genocidal maniac in some of his military expeditions, he was trying, I think, to do good things for Rome. Yeah, he was ambitious for himself, and he was a real ladies' man. He was always, he had all kinds of girlfriends and all kinds of business. And when he conquered, won a battle in Egypt, he then had the big affair with Cleopatra. He even had a child with Cleopatra. The Romans didn't like that, though. They didn't like the idea of Roman wealth and power being siphoned off to Egypt. Later on, Mark Antony made the same mistake. But anyways, it's good to know something about Julius Caesar. I thought he was kind of interesting. I'm trying to think, was there anything really interesting about him? That's pretty much the big stuff. So anyways, I hope that was interesting.